Today we're going to talk about the continuity between the different regions from the abdominal region to the inguinal to the spermatic cord and finally the scrotum. So starting in the abdominal region, of course on top of every human we're going to have a big layer of skin, and this is going to transverse through all of these regions. Next we'll have our two layers of fascia, the Camper's fatty fascia and the Scarpa's fibrous fascia, and those will continue all the way and end at the spermatic cord. And then if we return to the abdomen, the next layer, working superficial to deep, is the external oblique with its fascia and aponeurosis. Then the internal oblique with its fascia and aponeurosis. Then the transverse abdominis muscle with its fascia and aponeurosis. And then finally the transversalis fascia. Those are all unique to the abdomen area. Then we have your periontium that will extend through the inguinal canal, and we'll have your visceral organ layer that will extend through the inguinal canal. In the inguinal region, the external abdominal oblique will turn into the crura and intercrural fibers. If you recall, the intercrural fibers and the medial and lateral crus make up the boundaries of the superficial inguinal ring to reinforce the whole. The internal oblique and the transversus abdominis are going to join together in the inguinal region to make the conjoint tendon. The transversalis fascia in the abdominal region and the inguinal region will turn into the deep inguinal ring. So here's your transversalis fascia and your deep inguinal ring. So the external abdominal oblique that in the inguinal region turns into the intercrural fibers will now, past that, travel inferior into the spermatic cord and scrotum to become the external spermatic fascia. So once it makes its superficial inguinal ring, the layers that come out here is the external spermatic fascia. So the internal oblique and transverse abdominis that then turn into the conjoint tendon in the inguinal region, and the spermatic cord and scrotum will then turn into the cremaster muscle and fascia. Now the transversalis fascia that turned into the deep inguinal ring will now in the spermatic cord and scrotum become the internal spermatic fascia. So on our model, as the spermatic cord continues, this layer of fascia will be the internal spermatic fascia. So let's look at our deepest layers, the periontium and the visceral organs. Once we get to the spermatic cord region, the periontium will now turn into the processus vaginalis. The visceral organs in the spermatic cord region for men will be the vas deferens, and for women will be the round ligament. So in our superficial layer, in the scrotum, our Camper's and Scarpa's fascia will turn into the dartos, tunic, and septum. The processus vaginalis in the scrotum now becomes the tunica vaginalis. And finally, the vas deferens in the scrotum will turn into the tunica albuginea and testes. All right, let's look at this from a different view. So we'll start with the deepest layer down here, and we have our testes with our tunica albuginea in the scrotum. In the spermatic cord, it is the vas deferens, and then in the inguinal and abdominal area, it becomes the visceral organs. The next layer in the scrotum is the tunica vaginalis. In the spermatic cord, it is the processus vaginalis, and then the inguinal and abdominal area is a periontium. So our next layer, in the scrotum and spermatic cord, we have the internal spermatic fascia that travels up, and in the inguinal region is the deep inguinal ring. In the abdominal region, it's the transversalis fascia. So in the next layer, in the scrotum and spermatic cord, we have our external spermatic fascia, which in the inguinal region is the crura and the intercrural fibers around, around the, 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 In our scrotum and spermatic cord, we have the external spermatic fascia. In the inguinal region, we have the crura and intercrural fibers that surround the superficial inguinal ring. And then the abdominal region is where it's the external oblique muscle. So the next layer in the scrotum is the dartos tunic and septum, and then the spermatic cord all the way up through inguinal and abdominal regions. This is the Camper's and Scarpa's fascia. Last but not least, we have our skin surrounding all of this. So the scrotum traveling superiorly through the spermatic cord, inguinal region, and abdominal.